Ladies and gentlemen, ATDF everything in that shelf presentation. You're now rocking with TDF everything. Spoiled Rotten.
Spoiler alert.
Welcome and welcome back, everybody.
Hey.
It's me, Daniel,
And this is Ben
on Spoiled Rotten.
on that shelf.
Boom. Well, if you're looking, you can see that we've got sunglasses on.
That's right.
Ben had a good idea. We could just say this is us channeling our inner Scott Summers.
Mm-hmm.
And just really going with it.
We're not going to tell you the real reason why.
No.
But it's not important.
You're
here to listen to our voices.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't actually a video podcast, so it doesn't really matter.
We just do the promo stuff.
Yeah.
But we look cool. And
yeah,
that's
look at the promo stuff if you want to see what we're talking about. Yeah, we are here to talk about X-Men because the new show was coming out soon this month, like in a couple of weeks. So we thought, why don't we revisit season 1? Yeah, March 20th.
20th, right? Yeah.
Yeah, we're revisiting season 1 of that 90s X-Men show that everyone loves the theme song of.
Yeah, that theme song is just such a banger. It's so good. Yeah, and I'd watched it as a kid, but my issue was I wasn't allowed regular access to television. So whatever episodes I did watch at the time were like disjointed and out of order and all that kind of stuff. And for some reason, I don't know about you, but like YTV when I was a kid tended to really, really love doing the Dark Phoenix saga over and over and over again with their reruns.
Okay.
And so I remember a lot of the Dark Phoenix saga and a lot of the season 1, but never watched it in chronological order. And now I've understood that there is a chronological release order, and then there is another revised order that makes more sense.
Yeah, because I think there's a couple of times, not in season 1, but in seasons to come, where you have to flip a couple of episodes because for whatever reason they aired out of order.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I know the reason. Just they weren't ready. But yeah, we're gonna do season 1, a season that you can watch on Disney Plus in the right order and not worry about it. I think the big thing for me was I was definitely like, yeah, I guess this is where I formed all my opinions of the X-Men characters, without a doubt. But I don't think that it does every character justice. So that might be why I feel the way about certain characters that I do.
Which characters
I don't think Jean Grey and Cyclops come out of this looking great. Like they just feel so unimportant.
They feel vanilla.
Yeah, in this season. Like there's nothing really to them. I know I haven't read a lot of X-Men comics like recently. When I was a kid, I would read X-Men because that was what was readily available. But nothing really stuck with me, and it was not in any particular order. But I feel like I've heard of Cyclops being interesting, and just knowing his past, like his dad is like a pirate, like a space pirate and stuff, and he has such an interesting backstory, and he's so connected to Mr. Sinister, who I believe they tease at the end of this first season.
Yep.
But like none of that matters in this first season, which I feel is weird considering he's the leader.
Yeah.
Like he's, or even the whole Cable of it all. I feel like they don't even hint at it in this season. Cable shows up, but it's not like they're acknowledging that's his son.
Yeah, they very much had a coolness factor behind 3 characters and really, really focused around that. And I think it was Wolverine, Gambit, and Rogue that they really focused a lot of their story writing around in season 1.
Rogue is a big deal in this show.
Yeah. And I like Rogue in this. I dislike Rogue in the movies, but I like Rogue in this. And of course Gambit's cool, everyone's favorite Cajun and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, he doesn't feel real in this. Like I like his design, but just I guess it's because I know French and just also have been to New Orleans. Like you're just kind of like, that's not he's not talking like a human. He's just, and I get it. Like this, I think this cast was predominantly Toronto theater actors.
Yes.
So I'm not here to be like I could do better. It's more just maybe they should have been a bit more discerning with their casting.
But I think grace is given to the period of the 90s where, everything wasn't so socially aware at that point in time.
It's just he looks cool, he can do cool things, but I'm just like every time he talks, not even every time, just by the end of the season I was kind of like, oh yeah, I guess this is what we're gonna get if he's talking.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, you're just gonna throw a couple of mon cheries at the end of everything and be like, that's what Cajun people do. They do not do that, from what I understand.
Or they say it so that it sounds like they're from that region.
Yeah.
And not that like they're robots. Yeah, I think Cyclops is the leader, and you're just like, oh, okay, but he's not interesting, as you said. He's vanilla. Jean Grey just feels like a non-factor.
Yes.
Like, yes, she does a couple of things where she's like, stop that, and then uses her telekinesis, but it just, as you said, they really focus. They did do a Phoenix Saga eventually, but first season, you're just like, oh, and I remember thinking like, yeah, I don't care about Jean Grey, but she clearly is such an interesting character.
Yeah.
When you get into it.
Yeah, they really do Jean a disservice here because the way they write her, it's more like we're more interested in exploring this love triangle that exists between Wolverine and Cyclops and Jean Grey, as opposed to actually fleshing her out as a character, which they do later in future seasons.
Yes.
But in this season in particular, it's just like, oh yikes, you're really not doing much with her.
No, and even the love triangle stuff, which I don't think is a worthwhile thing for like your main female character, is like it feels like all of it's off screen. Like, yeah, you see the whole Cyclops is waiting for me, so am I, but like you're like, does she like, have they ever done anything to make him think this is a worthwhile endeavor? Like, she seems pretty firmly with Cyclops. I don't get how this is legitimately a love triangle.
Yeah, neither do I. I just feel like this is Wolverine being a little bit of a fuckboy in this kind of scenario.
That's the thing. Like, yeah, I mean, obviously, I think Wolverine's cool. He's got a lot of cool things he says.
Yeah.
And I like that in the show, he makes it clear, like, oh, being an X-Men means the world to me. I'll get pissed off and leave, but I'll be back because this means so much to me.
Yep.
But I was kind of just like, oh, like, as a kid, why did I like him so much other than, like, he doesn't do anything physically cool in the show, really. Like, in this first season. Maybe like you, I saw a bunch of scattered episodes. I just remember being like, yeah, he's so cool. Look what all the things he can do. I'm like, rewatching it, I just feel that he doesn't really, and that comes down to, like, limitations of what they can draw. It's not like everyone else was outperforming him.
Yeah, I think Wolverine is cooler in certain episodes because you get to see the actual extent of him using the adamantium claws and all that kind of stuff. Like Night of Sentinels, the first, like the 2-part pilot episode, he's really cool there because he's like actually slashing and dashing everything, right? But then when you get into the episodes where he's like, in the
when he's like in Alaska.
The Alaska thing, yes, but more so the underground people that faction of
the Warlocks.
Yeah, the Warlocks. He's like, yeah, he's not, because they're not going to show him hacking and slashing another human or another mutant.
Yeah,
anything that would bleed.
I think that's the issue is they can't do anything with his claws because they don't just fight Sentinels. So you're like, well, he's just not going to be using those things ever. And I think there was a point where he's trying to threaten people. It's when they go to like the Sentinel base to take down the Sentinels, and they're going up against guards, and he pulls out his claws. But as an adult, I know he can't really do anything with those, so it doesn't really matter. Like, I was like, it just doesn't feel intimidating like it should.
Right. It's a hard line to walk because, and this is the thing that impresses me about season 1 is like these are really adult themes. You know what I mean?
I think that's where the show shines. Like one thing I forgot was like, oh, Beast is just in jail the whole time.
Yeah,
like,
the whole
he's
season 1
completely sidelined.
Yeah.
But he's like, well, no, I don't agree with him, but he's like, I need to let the justice system do this the right way.
Yeah.
And there's like a whole like 5 minute scene just in the courtroom where they're just talking about the legality of everything and the morality of everything. And I was sitting there like, I can't imagine as a kid this would be interesting. I feel like this is exactly when you just walk away from the screen. And
Yeah.
I'm not saying that is a bad thing. I'm saying like it is interesting that they were up for doing their version or maybe what they were allowed to do in terms of serious issues.
Yeah. It's really cool to see that, but you're right. Visually, it's just like, oh god, that means Beast is like sidelined the entire first season. And when he does come in, he's like, nope, I'm not going to escape right now. I'm going to believe in the justice system, which I'm like, don't know if I agree with you there, bud. Pretty stacked against everything, and it is a cartoon, and it's like, yeah, he got out, yay, and all that. But you and I both know it's like, not really the real representation of what the X-Men core is actually about.
Because even if the character Beast wanted to do that, I feel X-Men is the perfect place to explore how there's no point in him doing that.
Yes.
Which they don't do, which is fine. Again, who knows what they're allowed to get away with while making the show when they made it.
Absolutely, because there's some things that I see here that I'm like, oh, okay, as an adult, I'm like, that's a little bit more now on the nose. Like, and I think this is more about, and I will say that because of the automatic watch feature, I'm like, I watched a bit of season 2, thinking it was season 1. But there's some overt things because obviously X-Men is that like whole civil rights liberation kind of analogy discussion in comic books, right? We have the Martin Luther and the Malcolm X kind of analogies with Professor Xavier, as well as with Magneto and all that kind of stuff. So they get to some visual imagery in season 2 where I'm like, that's so on the nose now as an adult. But in strictly talking about season 1, we have these kind of things where it's like, okay, they're pushing the envelope a little bit. And I'm surprised they kind of got away with that in the 90s.
I think, as you said, Night of the Sentinels was the first 2 episodes that introduces Jubilee. And I feel like there's a whole generation of us that really went with that 2000 X-Men movie by Bryan Singer, where you're like, oh, they made Rogue Jubilee for some reason. Because Jubilee is around a lot in this show, and it's just weird how she's just a non-factor in the movies, considering they said like it's so heavily influenced by the 90s. And I'm like, oh, then why did you make Rogue Jubilee? And the other thing I remembered rewatching this was, this flat out says she's Chinese American. As a kid, I just thought she was white, only because obviously she's the voice of Lunette from The Comfy Couch. So I was like, at no point did I think this was supposed to be a East Asian person or a person of East Asian descent. She just plays as white to me, other than the multiple times they put on screen that she is Chinese American.
That's the uncomfortable thing. Is it's like there's no visual indication that would carry over. You would, like, me watching it, I'm like, oh yeah, I guess they did commit to making her Asian, but in the sense where I'm like, there's no visual confirmation there. But to be fair, if there was visual confirmation, I'm pretty sure that would have been a decently racist portrayal of it in an animated sense.
It would have been rough because of who's voicing it, right? Like, you're like, might as well just made her white. Like, if this is what we were doing, I understand what they were doing. It's just like, hey, some Toronto people, they're gonna do the voices. I guess they couldn't find a Chinese Canadian to do Jubilee.
I don't think they were interested in that kind of stuff back then. And
well, I'm excited for X-Men 97 because they've made it more clear she is Asian in that, and I got to imagine they didn't get the same voice actress back.
Probably not.
Well, it's like a black writer, a black director. Like, it feels like people that will be aware of how representation should work at this level.
Absolutely. In this day and age and all that kind of stuff, at least. But yeah, that's the funny thing is when when we talk about the Ryan Singer Jubilee, they're like people. I distinctly remember some people in high school going like, "I can't believe they made Jubilee Asian." I'm like, are you joking right now? Like, what are you? What?
Yeah. Well,
like she's Asian.
I was just like, oh, that's cool that they didn't make it just another white person, and then I guess retroactively realize, oh no, they were just being true to the comics and even the cartoon, even though the cartoon did not read as Asian to me.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate thing, right? But it is what it is, and I do like the idea of Jubilee being like our childhood surrogate, like what it would be if we were in the X-Men. But then it also sucks because it's like, oh, especially in season one, Cyclops is literally sidelining her for everything.
Oh
it's
yeah,
just like, no, you can't
like,
come.
no,
you can't come.
The weirdest thing, I know we're jumping around here, but the weirdest thing is when Sabretooth is there.
Yeah.
Professor X is like, you stay with him. I'm like, are you kidding? Like, what a terrible decision. What is happening here?
You're not it's not the reverse roles where you're asking Sabretooth to babysit Jubilee. You're asking Jubilee to babysit Sabretooth.
Like how much like
what?
I guess I don't also know how long she's been there that you would trust that she's not just another student as opposed to a full-on X-Men.
Right.
Like it's just, and I'm not saying she should be a student, it just feels like, well, why do you trust that she's going to be able to handle anything that happens? And it is just this moment where I'm like, yeah, I'm glad they're showing that Professor X just isn't great at this.
Yes.
Because Wolverine is completely right when he's like, you don't know him, I know him, don't trust him, he needs to leave.
Yeah.
And Professor X is like, how dare you, Wolverine? He's like, but you don't know this guy. And then Wolverine gets him again when he's like, oh, we gotta take it easy on Magneto, he's my friend. And he's like, why would we take it easy on your friend? And I'm telling you, this guy shouldn't be trusted. I was really happy that all of that is seeded in this season of the Professor X's hubris.
Yeah, his hubris, his naivety, it definitely gets in the way of actual good decision making. And that's the thing I do like about Wolverine when he's nerfed, so to speak, where he can't be as cool as we think he is, because of the PG ratings and all that kind of stuff and what his powers inevitably are, is the idea of like, oh, he's gonna just outright critique you for that kind of thing. And he was like, no. And I like the idea of like, this is a team, so we should all be able to voice our concerns around this. Unfortunately, Professor Xavier being like, I want to believe the best in everyone. And I'm like, well, I mean, just screw everyone else over when you ignore the red flags.
I do think that the show is trying to be like, that's what he wants, but it feels like, I guess with the context of all the other description or versions of him I've seen, including like the House of X, Powers of X comics that I read, it just feels like more hubris than anything else, because it feels like he's like, no, I made breakthroughs with him. We did mind melds and he's good now. And Wolverine's like, no, that's not going to work. It won't, that's not enough. And it's Professor X being like, don't question how effective I am on this. He's fixed. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And then like later on, he's like, oh no, I failed. I'm like, yeah, because you truly believe that you know what you're doing and are not open to like learning anything else.
Correct. It's just like, it's a weird position to be in too, because it's like, why would you make Cyclops the leader of the X-Men, but then micromanage him in that regard? And it's so weird. It's like, why?
It's all a part of why I never really cared about Cyclops until I read comics and started listening to other people talk about his actual comic history. And I was like, yeah, this show does him no favors. He's just the guy there. Like, he's just the white man there. And I like scenes like when Wolverine punches him in the stomach and is like, how dare you make us leave Morph behind? And Beast, I was just like, yeah, this is great. This is great Wolverine stuff. But I feel like in an X-Men comic, there would have been more of a back and forth there, as opposed to him just being like, oh no, like we got it. It's the right choice. And I'm like, yeah, come on, man, stick up for yourself, Poindexter. You are the leader, and you like, what were you gonna do? Really, like that seemed like a perfect time to have a more of a back and forth. But the show's just kind of like, no, Wolverine's the coolest.
Yeah,
Cyclops is
Wolverine's the
just in his way,
coolest, and Cyclops is just a cop. Like that's
yeah.
all he is. Just
Which
and
just isn't fundamentally who Cyclops is. But again,
exactly.
I let this show really form my opinion on him.
Yes, that I do too. I did too. And I do understand and that he does have a very different comic kind of thing. Like the idea of like so at the end of the episodes where it's like they have the 3D model that's
Hmm.
rotating like a character selection screen on a video game. It says Cyclops' powers out of his eyes are like lasers. I'm like, well, what I understand from the comics, and don't quote me on this, but
Yeah,
like
they're not
those aren't
lasers.
lasers, but that's
No.
like a portal to a different dimension and
Yeah,
something
it's
like
just
that's
it's an
way
energy
cooler.
blast. It's an energy blast from another dimension. It's not a laser. Like it wouldn't like shoot through. It would be a concussive blow.
Yeah. I'm like, that's way cooler. I'm like, why? What? And like, did they not think that kids would understand that level of coolness, but have to like, oh yeah, we're putting like civil rights movement stuff in here too. It's
Yeah,
what
it
I
is a
don't
weird thing
understand.
of like, no, it's too much for kids.
Yeah, kids wouldn't
Anyway,
understand
you
this, but okay,
understand
they
how
say
everyone
civil
is.
rights stuff. Yeah.
Everyone should have equal rights, right? uh, we haven't talked about Storm. I think the one interesting thing they add for Storm, who I think still comes off better than Cyclops and Jean Grey,
Hmm.
is they add her claustrophobia, and I'm just like, oh shit!
Yes.
Like, there's just a scene where she's stuck in a buff for way longer than I would have that I felt comfortable with. But you're
Yeah.
just like, oh no, this is a problem. You gotta help Storm. You have to help Storm.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought they did a good job of like anchoring her in some like obviously the tendency would be to be like, these are gods, they don't have human problems, but then this literal god from Africa is like, nope, do not put me in small spaces, please.
Yes.
I thought that was good. And yeah, honestly, I do like whenever she just calls her play. She's like, I am going to summon this ice. And I'm like, you're sure giving a lot of people time to react to what you're about to do, but it's delivered so well that I'll accept it. I think that was
Absolutely.
another issue I had with the season overall was everyone explains things to death.
Hmm.
Like sometimes between characters, but a lot of time just to themselves or to camera, and you're like, yeah, I think that probably came from the heady ideas they wanted to put in there for kids at a kid's
Hmm.
level, not heady to an adult, but for kids. And they're like, well, we got to just make them used to people explaining things outright.
Yeah, yeah, it's kind of like how in X2, one of the knocks against that movie for one of the better regarded movies out of that era was that every mutant had to explain exactly what they did and how they did it and all that kind of stuff. And it was just like,
Yeah, like
but
that happens in this show too. And
yeah,
again, probably the influence from the show on those movies.
probably you're probably right because I can't imagine them doing that in the comics, but at the same time, I could imagine them doing that in very early iterations of the comics
Yeah. Well, I
because
mean,
they
there's
are very,
probably
very
like
diverse.
like there's probably sections just explaining stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a lot of dialogue is dedicated to being like, just in case you can't see what's happening on screen, we'll just tell you what's happening on screen.
Hmm. Hmm. And one of the things I think is really, really good about this is like the way I see the X-Men is like a Cyclops in this animated series is the manager, but Storm is the actual leader because Storm, whenever
Yeah,
she
and
does
that's
anything, it's what a leader would actually do. Like when the Morlocks and all that kind of stuff. The fact that she's like, yeah, I'll do this fight, no powers, all this kind of stuff, and then defeats the person there, and then all of a sudden goes like, yeah, I'm gonna transfer my leadership powers to this person in good faith and all that kind of stuff, and come invite you to join us in this. Like that's leader stuff. What
yeah,
Cyclops
Storm
does is like
is
a
written as the
micromanager.
leader a lot of
Yeah.
times, and I like um even in the House of X that I read, she's just like, yeah, Cyclops is my brother. Like you're gone, I'm holding things down. I'm the leader. When you're back, I respect you. You might not still be the leader, but I'm not gonna treat you like you're nothing. And I like that relationship that I like. It's only in a couple of lines, but I felt I liked that interaction between these two people that I have seen as the leader just through various media. The show, I think you're right, secretly is like, we all know who the real leader is here, right?
Yeah.
It's Storm. She's the
Yeah.
only one that like knows her shit
Yeah.
and doesn't really make mistakes.
Yeah.
And that doesn't make you a leader just because you don't make mistakes, but it just feels like she's the most at ease with what's going on, and has her bearings a lot
Yeah.
more than all the other characters.
Yeah, I feel like people in any kind of crisis, the X-Men here look to Storm for leadership in those kind of situations, but Cyclops is given the title, and I'm like, that's a very on the nose thing for
Hmm.
me to see as
Hmm.
an adult to be like, oh, okay. And like it's a black woman that's leading the revolution and all that kind of stuff, but a white man that's taking credit for it. I'm like,
Yeah,
yeah, okay, that is I see what's happening there. That's kind of, it's really, really clever
yeah,
to put that in this.
I agree. I like that part of when you step back and see what was done with Storm.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, as we said, Rogue is a big deal in this. She's the only character I felt spoke normally. Like, yes, she's got the southern
Yeah.
thing, but I felt like, oh, this is a character who's legitimately operating like you would think a normal character in this situation would, in terms of how she speaks, and
Yeah.
very little explaining what's happening and actually just being present in the moment and
Mhm.
reacting to it.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I just liked her as a character in this. And when they do the storyline about mutants being able to lose their powers, even though
Yeah.
it's a trick, I feel for her when she's like, "Well, I don't want to die before knowing what it's like to touch another human."
Yeah. It like that line to me is so brilliant because it's to the point of what you said. She's the only one that's actually present and connected
Hmm.
from like an emotion standpoint to everyone else versus everyone else is kind of like doing their own thing and they're like characters and all that kind of stuff, but she's the only one that's actually connected but unable to touch anyone versus
Hmm.
like you have Jean and Cyclops' relationship where they're able to be romantic together, they're able to kind of do all that kind of stuff, but they feel like robots standing next to each other.
Yeah, like I can't imagine people were like, "Yeah, those are my favorite characters," solely based on the show.
No, people would like based on the show, people would like Cyclops just because his title. And I'm like,
Hmm.
well, his title is meaningless because again, you have the whole Professor Xavier micromanaging him situation, and then you have people not actually listening to him, they're listening to Storm. So
Yeah,
it's just like he's got the title, he's got the promotion, but he ain't got the power that comes with it.
no.
Right. And that's a good kind of commentary on like, yeah, okay, chief of police, whatever. Get out of here. Right?
um, yeah, I like what you said about the connection, and there's the characters who are able to touch but don't feel like they're truly connected, and then we have this one. The Gambit stuff, I remember as a kid being like, yeah, they're in love, and this first season, I'm just like, man, you gotta leave her alone.
Yeah.
This is rough stuff to have to sit through.
Yeah,
Where
this is
he's just,
harassment, bud.
yeah, just harassing her all the time. At some point, you're like, okay, she likes him, but I don't think the show showed you anything that would lead you to believe it's because he met her on her level at all.
No, I think if anything, what I get from it now is like, oh, she likes the attention and the playfulness, but that's all it really is. It's a tease at the end of the day, and she knows that, but he does not. You know what I
No.
mean? And that's the part that really sucks. It was like he will push until the point where she's like, you know why I can't do this?
Hmm.
I'm gonna put you in a coma, and then maybe he's like, maybe that's worth it. And I'm like, what are you doing, man?
Yeah, leave
No
her alone.
means no.
Yeah.
Back off.
um, they did a few storylines that I remember, like the mutants
Yep.
being able to, and obviously the big one, Days of Future Past and Apocalypse are big ones.
Hmm.
I like their take on Days of Future Past, but it feels so like watered down compared to the movie.
Yeah.
And it's 3 episodes, so it feels like obviously that's still less time than a movie, but in TV speak, that felt like enough time to do.
It does feel like a movie of its own in TV time, especially in
Uh,
the 90s.
yeah, it just feels so low. But because I think as a kid I was like, oh no, Gambit's a bad guy, but with distance, even not really remembering how they were gonna do it here, I was like, well, obviously it's a shapeshifter. I don't like. There's no real mystery here, or
Yeah.
again, the way that Gambit delivers his lines, I'm like, he doesn't. I know you're upset because clearly that's what's happening, but you don't feel like you're actually upset. You feel like you're just like, okay, well, I'll go somewhere else then.
Hmm. Hmm. It just feels like he's just like, all right, you can't fire me, I quit, kind of
Yeah.
energy.
No, I mean, that is what he does, but it doesn't even feel like that energy. It just feels like, oh, all right, I'll see you later then, I guess. I'm leaving.
Yeah, it's not like Wolverine where he's like,
Yeah.
no, I need space, and I'm,
Yeah.
and the way Cyclops just like comes down on him, I was like, you need to be a part of this. Are you? I'm like, this is bullshit, man. Like you're the one that's driving him away
Yeah.
because of this
Uh,
need to pull people closer, all this nonsense. But you're right with Gambit. Yeah, he doesn't sound like no, he's just a reactive guy, and I'm like, oh, it doesn't mean you have a voice of your own. That kind of sucks here.
yeah. But I mean, it is good the way they deploy Mystique in this season, because I think of
Yeah.
all the familial connections, Mystique and Rogue is the only time they like address it head on. Where she's
Mhm.
like, "Well, you remember me looking like this, but like I'm your mother," and I'm like, "Oh shit!" Like they did it. I couldn't remember if they were gonna do that in this uh show, but they did. They addressed it.
Yeah.
But I'm like, oh, they're not gonna do anything with Juggernaut or Sabretooth, like any kind of like connection beyond. Well, we're on screen together.
Yeah, because I can't remember the Juggernaut episode that well, but they don't actually go like he's the stepbrother of Xavier in
Yeah,
this,
like
do
he's the
they?
stepbrother that used to bully him, and
Yeah.
it's like a big deal. Or even, and maybe this is, and I will 100% admit my ignorance here.
Mhm.
The whole Magneto was this helmet, and it's part of the reason Juggernaut has a helmet as well. They all know, like, that's how you keep Charles out of your head, but that
Yeah.
doesn't seem to be a factor in this show. So is
Mhm.
that just like a creation from the movies?
I don't think so.
Or
That's
after the
definitely,
show, or
I'm
after
pretty
the
sure
show is out?
that's in the comics, but they don't explain it here. Or at
Well,
least
no,
I
I
didn't
just feel like for
here.
Magneto, and Juggernaut's not around long enough for this to matter, but like for
Right.
Magneto specifically, he just has the helmet and he can still get into Magneto's head. So it's
Right.
not, they're not acknowledging that in this show. And so
That's
even if
right.
it's from the comics, maybe it was from after the show came out.
Maybe.
But yeah, it felt like a missed opportunity, but that might just be my dedication to the movies I grew up with.
Right. And the thing that's surprising to me in this is like how little Magneto is actually in this season.
Yeah.
And because he's in the movies, he's like the bad guy, you
Yeah.
would think, right?
I
Um,
liked that they did it that way. That it's like
yes.
he is someone that you need to worry about, but there's very real present danger with the humans that are acting against them and who the humans are working with.
Yeah.
I appreciate that, and it made, because I don't think this show does a good job of the Malcolm X and Martin Luther King comparison, but I
Mhm.
do think that at least for, if you wanted to put that on Magneto, you feel that from the Malcolm X from him of like,
Yeah.
oh, I'm not trying to work with them. Like they are the reason we're in trouble. Like we need to stop that. We need to
Yeah.
stop making ourselves small for them.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very, very true versus, obviously Professor Xavier's philosophy is very much yeah, no, we can coexist. We can all be happy. We just need to, do this naive stuff for cameras a little bit more, and
Mm-hmm.
Magneto, obviously, with his trauma, is not really explored in this yet. But we know from the movies and a lot of the
They
other
bring it up,
Magneto
but it's
stuff.
not. They made it decidedly not um, concentration camp stuff. It's
Yeah.
just, oh, they attacked my home
Yeah, they
country.
didn't do the Holocaust stuff.
Yeah,
That is very, very
effective.
important to explore and effective. Absolutely. Because once you come at it from that angle, you're just like, yeah, I actually understand what Magneto is saying. This is the horror and extent of what he's experienced
Mm-hmm.
versus Xavier has been just like in a position of privilege his whole life, to be
Yeah,
perfectly honest,
that's why it can't really ever be Malcolm X Martin Luther King, because that's
Yes.
not the actual dynamic or like that's not the dichotomy between the two of them. But
Yeah.
I understand how people, to simplify things, say it that way. But this
Mhm.
show in particular, and in general, that's not really how Martin Luther King operated.
Of course. of course. And it's and that's why it's an analogy or like metaphor or whatever for the civil rights movement, but it's never going to be like this is directly, because
Yeah,
it's
yeah. It's not
always
one to
got to
one.
be that lens of like how do we make this an actual comic book too, because I think outright it would be full on disrespectful to be like, yeah, this is Martin Luther as a comic book character, and you're just like Dr. Martin Luther, I should say, as a comic book character, and it's just like maybe that's not the best way to go about it either, but
Yeah, especially when we talk about all the flaws with
yes,
Professor X and the
yeah,
hubris.
yeah,
It's not. Yeah, it's not a great example.
mm,
But I understand the general consensus of one turns the other cheek, the other one is like by any means necessary. But
yeah,
when you fully embrace what they were about, you see that it doesn't fully hold up as a proper analogy. But we're not
yeah.
here to discuss that. I just wanted to make that clear that I'm aware that it's not a perfect analogy.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And I wish I knew more about that and can speak more to it, but I mean, your voice is more important in this matter than mine is. So, it's and I know that too. It's just like, okay, could I go into the details? No. Am I comfortable? No. I just know that it's not a good comparison. It's
Yeah,
just really, really not when you dig deep into it for sure. But it's the idea inspired it, and
yeah.
that's what's important. Because it does open up that discussion arguably to more
Well, I
people,
mean,
even though people are like
the idea works insofar as it's like there is the black guy who's acceptable to white people and the
yes,
guy who's not acceptable and scary to white people.
yeah,
That is as far as it goes.
yeah, the passing idea, and the idea that, and I'm so glad we're talking about this, because for everyone that's complaining about X-Men 97 being woke, I'm like, what the hell are you talking
It's
about?
so I hate that discussion. Like
It's
they
dumb.
oh they removed sorry, what's her name? Rogue's butt, and it's like, well, did you like we just rewatched the first season. It looks the same except for certain shots. Like looks the same as it does in the trailer for 97. It's
Yeah,
not that big thing that people see when she falls down uh next to Apocalypse.
yeah,
Like that was a shot. But if you watch like that episode, it's not like that's what she looks like the whole time.
right. Just like,
So it's just these very awkward, like, why are you looking for this material that is not there to titillate you to titillate you?
yeah, and to further add to that, I'm like, based on a trailer, dude. Like based on a trailer, we didn't even get 97 yet. It's
Yeah.
it's not out yet, so we don't know what's
Well, they're
actually
also
happening.
upset because Morph is non-binary, and I'm just like, why would that upset you? It's a character who can turn into anything. So yeah, that makes sense that they would be at a certain point non-binary. Like they would identify as non-binary because they wouldn't feel the need to be like, I'm a man or I am a woman.
Yeah. And it doesn't, and it's weird because it's like I don't get it. Like, why are people putting all these projections? It's like, okay, now it's more we have more of a dialogue around this kind of stuff as a society, and we can discuss it more. Back then they didn't, and it's clear that they had to make modifications to be what I consider to be palatable towards white people in
Mm-hmm.
this regard, right? It's like, oh, you can't have Professor Xavier be black. I'm like, yes, you absolutely can.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love for that to be the case because it would be so much better. It's like, no, you have to have Patrick Stewart. I'm like, God damn it.
Yeah,
God damn it. This is
that's
just,
the bummer. Uh, and I'm not saying he did a bad job. I'm just saying it is part of. I think one criticism of this show that I appreciated because I've already been feeling it when it comes to what they're doing with X-Men was, for me, MCU was a chance to just do new things. Like
mhm.
I liked that for the first two Spider-Man movies, you were watching him fight villains you haven't seen him fight before.
Yeah.
And obviously, No Way Home is a very specific thing. Like I didn't feel cheated out of that. I
Mhm.
just was like, oh yeah, this is a very interesting way to bring everything together. But yeah, like when it was like, oh, it's Patrick Stewart playing Professor X, I was like, oh, yeah, I saw that already. What? Like, let's do new things.
Yeah.
Um, and I get this when Hugh Jackman comes back to be Wolverine and Deadpool. That makes sense as closing off that
Mhm.
stuff. But when people are trying to make it like, and then he's coming back for this and this. I'm like, no, like I want to see a new Wolverine, and this show is like another example of like we're bringing back anyone who's still applicable from the old cast, and it's just the same storyline. It's like, well, I mean, we're doing new stuff. You could just make a new show. Like there have been other X-Men shows. You did this didn't need to be a continuation. I'm excited to watch it, but I would say that yeah, like the sinking feeling I get when it comes to the X-Men stuff of, are we going to do new stuff, or are we just going to keep finding ways to pull in the old stuff?
Like to me personally, whenever, and don't get me wrong, I love Hugh Jackman, but one of the coolest things I think about Wolverine is that he is short. He's supposed to be short. So the idea of like, all right, let's have someone short play actual Wolverine. And I'm not talking about like ridiculously short, but like 5'4" short, which is like, it gives him a different edge for you to understand where a lot of that anger comes from.
He's supposed to be like a wrecking ball. Yeah. I mean, that's what's good about Hugh Jackman is he took that character and made it his own. Like
yes.
You're like, okay, yeah, that's Wolverine. And he did it for 20 years. But yeah, I'm hoping, I mean, obviously they're going to do new stuff, but I keep getting, unlike Fantastic Four, where even when they were doing just a stunt casting thing, it wasn't someone who'd already played Reed Richards. It was a new person playing Reed Richards, even though we knew that wasn't going to be the Reed Richards moving forward. So it feels even more like a sinking feeling with X-Men than even Fantastic Four, where I'm like, well, they are doing new things with Fantastic Four. Not so much X-Men.
Yeah, it's well, we'll have to see what happens, right? Because I mean, rumor has it that Avengers 5 is now X-Men versus the Avengers, but we'll see what happens there, whether or not they play that card faster or not. But
I don't think that's a good idea, but who knows?
I with you. I don't think it's a good idea, but I can see how they could do it. I can see why they would do it, and it's just giving the squeaky wheel more grease. It just sucks.
Yeah,
I hate it.
Yeah, well, we'll see. What else?
But back to this though.
Yeah, this.
I do like the stuff.
Yeah, I guess I want to talk about Days of Future Past because it brings in Bishop and Forge, characters who I thought were just completely linked to Cable, but they're clearly not. Like I don't know why I had that memory, but yeah, I liked that they used this new character to do the time travel. It's short lived, but you have that tension of, oh wait, why am I here again? Oh no. But it's solved within seconds. But I liked, again, rewatching this and not remembering how things were going to play out, being like, oh no, like he's going to screw things up because he doesn't remember. Oh no, I guess he figured it out pretty quickly. Never mind.
It's you, Gambit, you were the one that did this. It's like very, very quickly. But I that angle is really, really cool because I like the fact that the movie made the point of like, no, it has to be Wolverine because he can survive but also retain the memories too.
Because they did that in here. They're like, oh, I mean, it's the opposite. It's like, well, it can't be you, Wolverine, going back because you're too old at this point. You're going to be completely cooked if you go. At least Bishop is young and he's got some leeway there.
Yeah.
But I do like that they held on to, like, in both versions, they hold on to like, this isn't just as easy as time travel. Like it will fuck you up. So it has to be someone who can withstand that. And I like that that's present in both versions.
Yeah, because like and that's one of the cool things I like is like, okay, time travel stories are fun, but not having the consequence to going back in time sucks. And they both Days of Future Past in this as well as the movie, they do a good job of explaining like it's not that easy. You can't just do it. It's just there's certain amount of things that need to be considered amongst many other things, but it's the idea of like you can't just do that without having some sort of side effect. And they do such a good job of like imagining and explaining, oh yeah, this is why we can't send the entire team back.
Yeah.
Aside, in this. And once they're back, it's just like I like there was a line, I don't know who it says, but who says it, but it's like, we're supposed to believe that you're just from the future? Like, what the?
Yeah.
Prove it.
Yeah, I think it's Wolverine who's constantly like, I don't believe this. And then he does something that proves it. And I like that Wolverine's kind of like, I still don't believe him.
Yeah.
I don't. Something about this guy. I just don't like it. but yeah, I like the introduction of Bishop. I like that it looks like he's gonna be a big part of X-Men 97.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
And Forge is always cool. Like he can make weapons.
Yeah,
That's
Forge is
just
cool.
cool. Apocalypse. I think that was the other big thing I forgot was that obviously through the movies, Mystique is so tied to Magneto, but she's just not in the show, and I would imagine comics as well. She's working for Apocalypse, really, like behind the scenes and trying to get the Four Horsemen set up.
Yep.
I think it's not a fair way to judge it, but I like how the show lines up with the movies. It doesn't really contradict. I'm like, yeah, like we're doing the Apocalypse story. Oh, and Angel's in this, just like the movies. Yep, they're checking all the boxes for me. This works.
Yeah, yeah. And watching Angel switch to Archangel in this was like, oh man, I never realized that how epic that scene actually is, where they turn him over and all that kind of stuff, right? Because throughout the whole, what I remember of the animated series was like, oh, he's kind of Archangel the entire time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, the first time you meet him, he turns into Archangel, right?
Yeah.
Or is he a little bit in, because it's like a two-parter, right? But is he in the first part as just Warren and Angel?
I think so. And then later on,
for whatever reason, I thought he changed in the same episode to Archangel.
Right. I can't remember that so much, but I do know that later on there are like episodes where it explores the original lineup of the X-Men, and that's where probably we're gonna see Angel as Angel again. But you know, like throughout the entirety of the show, he's basically Archangel.
Yeah.
Which is wild because I'm like, this is visually, it's, oh god, Archangel, this just looks so cool. He just looks so cool.
The only thing that was weird was he got to still be called Archangel, right? But I feel the other horsemen were just what, like, your war, your pestilence.
Yeah.
And I was just like, oh, it feels like we didn't live up to the, like, coolness of seeing characters we've known. I mean, obviously we didn't know Angel before this, but you got to see him before he became a horseman, but you don't really get to see the other people before they're horsemen. So it's just kind of like, I don't know, I guess whatever. I don't even know who these characters are.
Yeah, and you know, it's obviously him being the angel of death of the art, like, but it's just like, oh man, I wish Apocalypse even just called him the angel, my angel of death once, you know, and you know, but whatever. That's not important. We know what they're trying to do. It worked. It worked really, really well.
It is also interesting that Oscar Isaac has said, like, that's why he played Apocalypse, because of this cartoon.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, like, he said in the same interview, like, yeah, it was a real bummer. Like, we didn't do it justice. But I was like, yeah, this is just not the same performance at all.
Oh, absolutely not. No.
The other thing I like, I mean, I really like Magneto, but he's since passed, but George Murner is Magneto in the first season, and I actually worked at the same place. I guess that's the sad affair of being a Canadian artist, is that we both were working at a telemarketing thing decades later.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the sucky part about Canadian
but he was a great person. I mean,
industry.
Who knows what could come out of. I enjoyed my time with him.
Right.
I thought he was very welcoming, not at all like, we never talked about him being Magneto. That wasn't who he was. Like, he didn't make you jump through hoops or treat you any differently. We were all in it together, and he was very nice.
I love hearing stories like that. It sucks that, you know, Canadian actors and all that kind of stuff in Canadian media and itself doesn't get the money it deserves to get, because there's so much creativity and there's so much stuff. Like, this is one of those examples where it's like everyone, like, there's so many people that love this series, and then for people to be like, wait, what? Like, it's kind of like right now how in Euphoria, not that I watched Euphoria, but I watched the mother of Zendaya's character go on stage and go like, yeah, I need Zendaya to come back to do season 3. I need season 3 because I need to pay my rent. And I'm just like, damn. Like, that's why the actors strike was so important, right? Because this is we can be loved, like, these characters and these actors are so beloved, but they can't pay their rent. Like, that sucks.
That's
It sucks so
I was so
much.
happy that like those stories were coming out where people were like, well, yeah, I'm on like the highest streaming show, like Orange is the New Black, and I'm still having to go in like while the show is at its height, still having to go into my waiter job and
Yeah.
not still have to like worry about making ends meet.
Yeah, that sucks because you think like as an actor, as anyone in entertainment, when you make it to that level, that the money comes with it. Not always, and very rarely I find it's like okay, it's and even now the gap is closing even bigger and bigger and bigger, right?
Yeah,
But
it's not fun to think about. But yes, I it was nice to hear his voice again and enjoy the performance
yeah,
for what it was. Even though, as you said, yeah, he's not the main villain. He's just a threat, and I think they do a good job of setting him up as like, yeah, don't fuck around with this guy. He knows what he's doing.
mhm. And I think the interesting thing about that, because we do know that in '97 he becomes the leader of the X-Men, it's
Mm-hmm.
just it leaves room for him to actually do that well, as opposed to like in the movies. It's just like, whoa, 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 whoa. No, you can't spend like 18 movies fighting this guy and then all of a sudden accept him as your leader. What's happening here? Like, no, this can't happen. Like
Yeah.
here, you can actually be like, okay, cool, this works. And I
Or
think what they
that's just
do
gonna be an opportunity for them to butt heads and have interesting conversations.
that too. I mean, that's the interesting thing I like about the X-Men as a team is that they do butt heads and they have these conversations out in the open in what we explore, right? But they do still fundamentally function as a team as
Yeah,
opposed to
I that's what I when X-Men were coming when they bought Fox basically. I was like, yeah,
right.
X-Men can just stay in their own thing. You don't need
Yes.
to intermingle with the MC like the Avenger stuff. I
Right.
understand the fun of that, but I feel like it's such a rich world. Like even in this first season, you see so many different avenues. Like there's the
Mhm.
team proper, but then it's like, well, what's going on with Cable? What's going on with Ford? What's going on with Bishop? And like Colossus shows up at one point. You're like, there's just all these other characters that would feel like it would merit its own universe for them to just be able to fully explore it.
I couldn't agree more with you on that. Like and I do like how in the few comics I have read with X-Men crossed over with the Avengers and all that kind of stuff, that the commentary is always there. It's just like, yeah, but you're still going to side with the non-mutants,
Mm-hmm.
meaning the Avengers side
Yeah.
of things. Like at
Yes.
the end of it, we're fighting together, but you still have that bias. And speaking to Captain America, whoever the leader is, that you're going to side with the humans over the mutants, despite the fact that we're fighting on the same team and we're supporting each other right now. You are going to choose their politics over ours,
Yeah.
and that is something that is a huge problem point. And I don't think that they're going to actually do a good enough job exploring that in the MCU because now we reduce that down to let's be generous and say a 2.5 hour movie where people are more interested in let's see them fight. And I'm like, not saying that I don't want to see them fight, but I definitely think that there's more stuff to explore here from an intellectual standpoint that's really cool that they're probably not going to be able to dive their teeth
Yeah.
into.
Because it doesn't need the other characters to explore it.
Exactly.
They've got everything they need. But yeah, we'll see it. It could be fun. It
Yeah.
probably will be fun. I just thinking about it ahead of time. But yeah, I'm I'm glad we agree. Like they're definitely a unit. You don't need to like because I saw some people being like, "Oh, take your time with the X Men. Like do a Wolverine movie, do a side." I'm like, no, they're a team. Like
Yeah.
you do a team movie, and like that's the way you do it. And if you want to add other people or spin them off after the fact, sure. But the X Men are a group. Like they're a family. They're a team. It's more than the Avengers. Avengers and Justice League to a point are kind of like we come together when there's a big deal. Whereas
Yes.
X Men are like, oh no, like we're just a team. Like we do this together all the time.
Yeah. And that's an important thing because like the Avengers swap roster positions like it doesn't matter, right? It's just like, oh, we need a roster position filled. And you know, that's why we get the lineups that we do, which is fun in its own right. But I like what you said about the X-Men being more of a family unit is the idea of like, no, they're not making that many swaps. And when there is a swap or someone's missing, it becomes a bigger deal. Kind of like the whole Wolverine just
Yeah,
being like,
Wolverine
yeah,
being
I'm
upset about Beast and
yep,
Morph.
exactly. He's like, I'm gonna screw off, I'm gonna do this thing, you know, and then I'll come back and then Cyclops being like, I can't believe you left me. So, all this, like, there's actual tension there that's worth exploring versus like with the
Thor being like,
Avengers,
I'm
like,
gonna
oh
leave
yeah.
now in the middle of this movie. Bye.
Yeah, and then compared it to the Beatles breaking up, like what, like a band, like you broke up like the Beatles, like what, like that is true. It's 100% true. And that's why I'm like, even though I would kind of love to see Wolverine on the Avengers, it's just a visual thing that I want to see it for. I don't want to see him leave the X-Men,
Yeah.
you know. But it is what it is. But I mean, this season one is so solid, and I can't believe they did Days of Future Past here, and it was so successful. And there's so many other storylines that just build up
Yeah,
and build
I
up.
like that it ends with them being like, I mean, things are still fucked, so I don't think this worked. And you realize, like, hey, he's still scared the senator. That didn't stop him from being like, we gotta have sentinels. That just made him be like, oh, like, I'm really scared of these guys. We gotta do something.
Yeah, yeah. It just made Senator Kelly be like, maybe we don't know yet.
Yeah.
And that doesn't inspire any certainty. It's just like it just adds to more questions, and I like that feeling towards it because I mean that's what I like about this is the idea of like the adult themes being this is not a genuine happy ending. It's like wait, this is just an ending that it needs to be explored further, as most things do when it comes to civil rights. It's not just, oh, we had a conversation, you're good now. No, it's one of many.
Yeah, it's like constant work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um. Yeah. I guess what's the final episode?
It's the final decision.
Decision.
What it's called.
What even happens in that?
Mr. Sentinel gets set up a little bit.
Sinister,
yeah, they're Mr. Sinister, sorry. He gets set up a little bit and all that kind of stuff. It's I don't think it's more of a season finale, more it is like, hey, we'll be back for season 2 kind of promise.
Because they did Genosha pretty quickly.
They did.
Which I thought that was like a weird. I'm like, I know what you guys are getting at, but it's so weird that it's like the fight between Cyclops and Gambit was Cyclops just thinks Gambit is making shit up, and I'm like, what kind of fight is this? What is happening here? He's like, stop lying, Gambit. All you do is lie. He's like, I'm not lying. This is a real thing.
I'm like, and I'm just thinking the entire time, I'm like, Cyclops, stop being a dick and believe your team member. Like, what the hell is this? Like, he's not gonna just change the truth just to make it comfortable for you. And that's why I'm like, yeah, this is why Cyclops is a cop. He sucks in this iteration.
This iteration is no good.
Yeah.
And then Professor X completely cutting the legs out from under Cyclops. I mean, nah, this is a good idea. Go check it out. But don't worry, Cyclops.
You know what the micromanage.
But don't worry, Cyclops. You get to pick who goes, but we are going.
Yes.
I don't care what you say. We're going, but you get to pick who goes.
Yeah, and then that's clearly when Cyclops is like, all right, these are probably the least important people, but we do need one person that knows what they're doing. So like Storm, you babysit Gambit, and my biased perception of Gambit as well as Jubilee, because there's okay, well, this is the one thing Jubilee can go on vacation, like, but everything else you stay back at the mansion.
Yeah, even if it means having to fight Sabretooth by yourself.
Yeah. It's so dumb. And ignoring everyone else, because he ignores Wolverine a lot. He ignores Gambit a lot. And I wouldn't say that he ignores Storm a lot. It's just that him and Storm have this kind of like unspoken agreement that we're just not going to clash in front of everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
It feels that way. Not that they actually did that, but it just feels like, all right, well, I better shut up. As I said,
in the comics I read, it was a mutual respect. This show is kind of just like, they just don't fight.
Yeah. They just, because it's like they probably, and I get the sense is like, oh, they probably clashed a lot, and they just got to the idea of like, no, I'm just going to keep my peace. That's it. I'm just going to keep my peace.
Yeah. I mean, it's not. I feel like it was hard for me to get through this, if I'm being honest, because of the animation. But
I'm so glad you said that.
And as I talked about the line delivery, but as you said, there's so many interesting things at play in here. I can't let that drag the rating down too much. It is doing a bunch of things well, in addition to hitting beats that I care about for X-Men.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm very happy that you said that because the animation to me was just not it. Like I found myself like really paying attention from an auditory standpoint, but
Yes.
like any chance I could, I would be looking at my phone or anything like that. I'm just like, oh, the animation's just not it. And that's not fair for me to
No.
say for a 90s series that probably had a very limited budget and definitely had production issues along the way.
I think I can't remember because well, obviously it was made in Canada because of the
Mhm.
Toronto cast. And that was the issue because they were supposed to do the crossover with Spider-Man, but only Beast and Wolverine did the crossover
Yeah.
because that's all they were willing to pay to fly to LA and do the voices. So I do think, even though people don't like the Spider-Man animation, I don't think it's great either. But for some reason, it works better for me. Maybe I just like the character more. But yeah, it does feel like X-Men was the production that got the shaft in terms of production.
Yeah, yeah. The Spider-Man animation I didn't love too much either because I'm just like and this is I think the major issue with the 90s, to be perfectly honest. And this extends to um the action figures that came out of the 90s in that period too, where everyone was just jacked. Like
Mm,
you have a Luke Skywalker. I still have a Luke Skywalker action figure, and I'm like, he was not jacked like this. What are we doing here? And that's one of my criticisms with Cyclops constantly is like, why is he so jacked? But all he needs to do is just look at people. Like, sure, whatever. But it Peter Parker being jacked. I'm like, you're supposed to be playing a nerd. And this does not give off the impression of a nerd. This gives off the impression of a smart linebacker. Like, what are we doing here? And yeah, that even though it is their animation, it is their kind of thing, but it is disconnected for the most part. It's just I don't believe Peter Parker is Peter Parker. I believe he's Spider-Man, but I don't believe he's the nerd that they're trying to portray in the series. And a lot of that extends to the X-Men too, and of course they obviously they're like this is what a woman should look like when they drew the X-Men and the rogue
mm.
thing that you were talking about before with the butt. And I'm like, yeah, maybe we can be a little bit more lenient on what our expectations and criticisms of women's bodies look like. It's
Yeah, I saw that criticism as well, which was sure they didn't make her look like she did again in a couple of shots of the show. It's not like she's consistently looking that way that everyone likes to post when
Mhm,
she's falling in front of Apocalypse. They still look like models. Like there's like there isn't
absolutely.
diversity in how the women look in that show.
Yeah. Yeah, and
I mean the
it's
heroes, to be clear. I
yes.
know that the Morlocks had diversity in what women look like, but for the main characters, they all still look like models.
Yeah. And I like the Morlock episode where it's like pointing out, it's like, hey, there's still this subsection amongst us mutants about those who would pass and those that would not. And
Yeah.
that's a very, very nuanced point that exists within the Black community and any kind of racialized community of like those that pass and those that don't. Um, for them to point that out, I'm like, this is very clever. This is very smart for them to do.
Because yeah, there was I mean, that is in the Morlock episode, but I feel like
Mhm.
it happens earlier with Jubilee trying to be like, what the hell is even going on? And she's like, oh well, we're mutants, and you seem to have got your powers early. Like we usually get them around this age. Uh, and Beast has to be like, I mean, yeah, I mean, lucky for you that you didn't turn into a big blue person. Like
Mhm.
it wasn't so easy for me to just hide my powers.
Yeah, yeah, is yeah, 100%, 100%.
Yeah. So yeah, overall interesting stuff to consider in the show. I didn't love how it looked, and we talked about it. I felt like Rogue was one of the only characters in the main cast that didn't feel weirdly stilted or robotic
Yeah,
in terms of delivery, but it's still exciting to watch. So
it's foundationally really, really good, despite all those flaws. And I'm gonna jack those flaws up to the limited budget, the era, the 90s.
yeah, it had a
Um,
bunch of stuff going against it. Like
Absolutely.
obviously stuff like that sometimes just doesn't age well, and I don't think they had the bigger budget of, especially when you consider like the voices that were on Spider-Man versus the X-Men show, where I think again it's all like Canadian people. Maybe there's a couple Americans, but there was like names like Martin Landau was in the Spider-Man show, and like a bunch of people. So yeah, you're kind of just like, I see where the budget was going in terms of these Fox shows.
Yeah, and one of the crossover over episodes with Spider-Man are definitely going to be limited for sure. It's stuff that now as an adult I'm like, oh, okay, that's why I didn't like that episode as a kid, because I didn't know about that. Wikipedia didn't exist. None of this kind of stuff exists back then, right? You just had to really be a part of the production crew or adjacent to actually know this kind of stuff. But as a consumer, a pure consumer of it, you're like, really, that's all? What?
Yeah.
That sucks.
I mean, to me, I was like, well, it's Wolverine and Spider-Man. What do I want? This is all I care about in terms of interacting. Like,
that is true.
And then later on, doesn't he? He gets to work with during the Madam Web episodes, like when they're doing Secret Wars. Basically, he's like, yeah, like give me Storm. She's awesome. I'm like,
Storm.
Respect.
It's legit awesome when Spider-Man stuff happens. Like the Spider-Man animated series. I'm pretty sure you're right. They probably had a better budget and all that kind of stuff. And I do think fundamentally whoever was funding Spider-Man versus X-Men were probably like, yeah, we can get behind a character that is not a critique on the civil rights movement a lot better, and we can put money behind this a lot more. The one thing I am confused about, or not certain about, is whether or not X-Men came out before the animated Spider-Man thing, because I think it did, right? I think it had 1 or 2 seasons before the Spider-Man seasons.
Let's find out.
Not that Spider-Man shows up in this season whatsoever. It's just that because they are so parallel to each other.
X-Men is 92, so yeah, I'm sure it's got like 3 years on Spider-Man.
Yeah. So definitely Spider-Man.
I think Spider-Man was 94.
Yeah, I think so. So yeah, that's good stuff.
Yeah, it was the Spider-Man show was 94.
Yeah. So obviously they had X-Men built the way. Built the way for Spider-Man.
Kind of like the movies. It was X-Men first, then Spider-Man.
That's right. I
think it was a 2-year gap there as well.
Yeah. Everything's meta when you look at it.
Exactly. There we did it. Let's rate this first season. I'm gonna give it a 7.5.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. If exactly like what we discussed, if the animation was a bit better, I definitely put this to an 8.5. But it's the animation that I'm like, oh god, I can't do this. And you know what sucks is like it's not. It was a budget thing, because when you look at animation in the 90s, I love Dragon Ball. That was awesome. It was so good. And the creator of Dragon Ball recently passed as we record, like yesterday he passed too. But the animation there, it was there, right? It's just the budget wasn't. So it sucks that it didn't age so well, because when I rewatch Dragon Ball now, very rarely, but when I'm like, this checks out. It's so solid.
Well,
yeah.
Well, we did it, guys. We revisited season 1 of X-Men. Thank you very much for listening. We're part of the That Shelf Podcast Network with other great shows like Contra Zoom Pod, Bad Gay Movies, and Springfield Googleplex. So go to thatshelf.com. You'll find those shows, our show, and more shows. If you want to hear older episodes of our show, you can go to tdfeverything.com/spoiledrotten, or go to any podcast platform of your choice. You can rate, review, subscribe, share with your friends, follow, do all that great stuff. And if you want to get in touch with us, we are at TDF Spoiled on Twitter, Instagram, and Threads. Our email is spoiledpodcast@gmail.com. So you've got some options there. Thank you very much for listening. We'll be back next week. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
This has been a TDF Everything production, brah.